Good evening, everyone, and happy birthday, Giulia. I see that such a beautiful car is loved by many, many people. It is a pleasure to see many people here. It is a pleasure to see the cars that created this nice word on our racetrack, and this week will become one of our flag this year. But Giulia would deserve more than 1 hour 15. But we'll try to do our best to give this tribute to one of the most important cars of this brand, a brand which doesn't stop to create enthusiasts with passion and raise the attention of clubs. Yesterday, during the club meeting, we've seen here a lot of people and from all over the world. Giulia means Varese, means a car which sold more than 500,000 items, a car which was at the cutting edge under many points of view, but also a car which was a disruptive car. On one side, the Giulia followed a certain design track. It was a real Alfa Romeo from every point of view. On the other one, it had the courage to do something different from the Giulietta that it had to replace. And this conference, this backstage, which is the 42nd, well, is always organized in collaboration with you, with the fans, with the clubs, and that is why I asked Domenico Pepe to come on stage because we organized this meeting with the Registro Giulia. Good evening. It's nice to meet you. My name is Domenico Pepe from the Registro Italiano Giulia, Italian Registro di Giulia. First of all, thank you for being with us. I would like to thank Lorenzo Ardizio and also Raffaella Quacquaro, the press office, for their collaboration, without which we could not have created this event. And well, the 60th anniversary of Giulia is a great occasion to show you this dynamic presentation of this product that Alfa Romeo produced for 15 years. So this is the Giulia T as it was born in 1962. But first we would like to summarize the main steps of this model, starting from the model up to the style and bodywork. And as always, to do that, I would like to ask Luciano Colle to come here because he was head of Alfa Romeo engines also during the Giulia period. So he can tell us how the 1600, the engine of Giulia, was born and why it replaced the 1300. I started working in Alfa Romeo in 1955. In 1960, well, in 58, I started work in the design department of engines. And up to 1993, well, I did several tasks. So until 1993, when I retired, so from just employee to the director of the design of all the Alfa Romeo engines, so in the Giulia. When I started the first 3 years of schools, I would say, it was 58 in planning and design, we were working for the evolution of the Giulia that had to be born in 60. So we started working to improve I'm just talking about the engine, the Alfa Romeo engine of Giulietta. In that period, there was a sports mechanics, a double shaft. There were a centralized double carburetor, but there were also some projects to put four horizontally. And in the Giulia, well, this evolution had the greatest positive effect. So the double carburetor started with the Lorto, the Weber, other brands, the filter, the air filter, and then there was a problem to better organize the shafts, the twin carburetor, to better cool down the oil, the material change. So the Giulia differentiated from the product that was circulating in Italy with other brands. So it was very sporty, and it was also an evolution to participate to some sports activities. So this is the basics. I don't want to uh, spend more time. Yeah, for sure. I'm sure there will be questions for you. Please be available. Okay, thank you. Well, Giulia, of course, stood out for its engine, but the real innovation of the model compared to Giulietta was its bodywork, not only from the stylistic point of view, but also from other points of view. And while everyone remembers also for the slogans, the commercials, and etc., for about the aerodynamics, the real point of pride of the Giulia was the safety. The Giulia anticipating the norms requiring, for example, what was required in the United States and what would come later in Europe, from the beginning had some equipment, and I remember it was mid 50s, so they had progressive deformation bodywork, so the capacity of absorbing gradually the impacts, trying to limit the impact on the passengers. So there was a series of padding in the inside, but from a technical point of view, it was very modern. It was a challenge because they started from scratch. And from an industrial point of view, it represented a great advantage because over the years, the norms would arrive, but the Giulia, which already was safe when it was launched, didn't need to be redesigned to follow these norms, and it would be produced for 15 years without big modifications to the bodywork. And it was also a profitable car because the same production lines produced it for many, many years without modifications. And all these innovations could not be visible from the outside. And on the press releases of the Giulia, these safety elements were published, were underlined, so there were commercial campaigns also, and advertising campaign, but these were aspects that were hidden. A chapter that was much more difficult to explain, but was also more visible, was the aerodynamics. Started from the beginning, the Giulia was conceived to be aerodynamic. Today we all know the CX034, which was the same of Citroën DS, the only other car which in 62 could boast that performance, and it was better than many other sports cars. Just 2 years later, in 1964, Ferrari 250 GTO and a CX of 0.42, so it was like a wall compared to the Giulia, but obtaining that result obliged this time not only to work under the skin, but also to work outside in the visible parts. That is why Giulia starts to have this shape with this hollow sides, the windshield which was curved, double curved, and was very expensive, and a series of details that were tried in the wind tunnel and live in order to have this result. A result that also had an impact, a strong impact on the style. And well, style in Alfa Romeo is very important. In this case, there was no collaboration with external creators, like many times, but it was a collaboration between the design department, so style, bodywork, and test, that these shapes were determined. And as I was saying, these will be welcomed not so enthusiastically, at least from the press in the beginning. But what makes an Alfa Romeo is what for this brand was not a simple testing per se, but it was a part of the design and development. So here we have notes and photographs of the picture. Domenico, maybe you remember something. Yes, these are pictures taken at Portello. This was called an Icoic room, if I'm not wrong. So there was a great heat, like 70, 80 degrees, to see if there were deformations. And this was called the cold room. I visited it. And it's like magic to go in. Of course, you try the effect of the car left outside at very freezing temperatures. And despite the freezing temperatures, the materials were incredibly qualitative. And that's why our Giulias arrived up to today. Because if you see Giulias which are restored today, well, they have most of the materials as original materials. And then there were static tests that put to the test the suspensions, the cooling down, etc. But in the end, as it always happened for Alfa Romeo, the last step was on the road at Balocco, which was opening in those years. Giulia and Balocco were born in the same year, in 1962. But the test pilots, well, in Alfa Romeo, was like a school. And we will also devote an episode of Backstage to this, maybe this year or next year. We don't know yet. So I apologize for not having a slide with this name, but we had a surprise today. We're one of the great test pilots of Alfa Romeo who made us a surprise, Luigi Croci. Do you want to say something about the testing of Giulia? A round of applause. This is a pillar of Alfa Romeo. I'm not big, I'm fat. I'm not a big pillar. But I don't know everything. But I'm the oldest living test pilot. So touch wood, touch wood. Well, Giulia was an incredible piece of genius by Mr. Orazio Satta, director of design, and Cavalier Busso, responsible of mechanic design, and by Cavalier Colucci, who dealt about the chassis. But they had been talking about this at the design department for some time, but Mr. Rusca, general vice director, was about to leave. I was 14, 15. I started working in 1950 when I was 14. So the fear was that he would leave with some drawings. So in a few weeks, this line appeared from the Centro Stile Alfa Romeo, designed by Professor Scarnati, who was the director, and by architect Ermanno Cressone. It was the vice. And also, for me, it was hard to understand it. It was critiqued. There were many critiques. But then, in the end, It was the one which helped Alfa Romeo. And in Balocco, when they did a system to do the impact tests, even though the Giulia had been built for a few years at the time, there was a picture before. Well, we realized that with the impact of Giulia, the front got deformations, and through the transmission, also the back got deformed, but the room inside, like the two seats, remained safe. In Balocco, we also had technicians from Menegildo Zegna, and they dressed the dummies to see how the body was damaged. So we started to know that the driving seat was one of the safest. The passenger seat was the death seat, so a back seat right is the safest. So back seat right, if you have children, put them back right. And not only children, also grandfathers. So I don't know everything, but after 12, 13 years I was there in the testing department. So when I became father, I loved my son, and we were out in Finland, Sweden, or in somewhere in Morocco for weeks or months. I didn't like to go abroad, so they offered me another job post, and then I came to know many things that I heard saying from people who, when they were working, were very high and could not even be reachable. And when these people came to the office, they were very pleasant with me. So I heard many things for important people. For example, the most important test pilot is Gonzalo Sanesi to me. I don't know if you know him. If you don't know me or you didn't meet him, you're unlucky. He won Grand Prix, Formula One. He went to the Mille Miglia. But at the time, there were like 3 cars for the Formula One. There was Farina, Fangio, and he always had the worst car, so he could not do his best. But he was a man who said, as it is today, it can be produced in series. So in life, either you suck or you blow. You cannot do both things at the same time. So if you take care of the comfort, you lose the drivability, and the opposite. So Senesi was the one who said, okay, that's the right setup. We can produce it in series. The great Sanesi, great man. So he had the same attitude with the managers or the cleaners. And then it was a family. I was a pupil of the father of this guy, Guido Moroni. Then there was Gonzalo Sanesi, the great testers, Guido Moroni, Bruno Bonini. People with a special sensibility. So now I don't even know what to say if you have a question. No, just a round of applause for you. But if you have questions, I'm here. Well, at the end there will be questions. Thank you. This car, and I don't remember the name of a German producer who did 341 was destroyed in an accident, and I was still a mechanics at the time. We spent there 1 month in Yugoslavia, which was more peaceful than today, up and down the hills and the mountains. We drove 100,000 kilometers. Karman, a German one. Yes. When I saw it, I remembered something, but I'm 86. It's not that elderly people lose the memory, but they have too many things to remember. Thank you so much. So unfortunately, we have to get back to our backstage. So we talked about the testing, and after the testing, there's the presentation. So the presentation was held in Monza, their right anniversary. It should be tomorrow. And in Monza, an incredible object was presented for Alfa Romeo. It would represent turning point, so everyone was there. The president, Giuseppe Luraghi, all the main newspapers, the most important Italian car magazine, Quattro Ruote, were represented by Mazzocchi, the founder and director. He looked at the car and said, I don't understand the line. Looks like a rounded but squared car. And the next day, on the main magazines and newspapers, the headlines are not enthusiastic. They say it's inconsistent between the outside and the outside. Why the drum and not the disc brakes, for example, etc. So there's many critiques, especially on the shape of the bodywork and the choice of the clutch shift and the 6 seats inside. So these things will be fixed by the Alfa Romeo, who would update it, but the shape instead was not changed, and that would be a defeat of the press, because the cars started to be sold and loved. So Alfa Romeo didn't lose time, and in those years Alfa Romeo was a master of communication. So they started to launch a series of advertising campaigns and promotional events to say not only by the Giulia, but explaining its innovations, even the hidden ones, those that usually only the experts know. But I wanted to explain why the shape is like that and why the car was created like that. Think about the 64 pages of the press release. More than 30 were devoted to explaining the back, which was truncated. So it was something different, but it had to be explained because there was a meaning and a reason, and by driving it, you could feel it. And step by step, the car goes on the market. More than 572,000 were sold in different versions. Today, thanks to Domenico, we will see some of them. But we can start from number 0. So the prototype of Giulia, the prototype of Yugoslavia, Luigi, you had a good memory, which was one of the 2 built, which before the presentation was tested in Yugoslavia, but not only, and which in some cases appears on the magazines. It's still called Giulietta 1600. yet the innovations are not described as their characteristics of this new car, but after the success of Giulietta, there's great expectation. So the prototype, thanks to Domenico Pepe, well, in the first season of our Backstage is we opened it, we analyzed it, we talked about it, and some fundamental aspects came out. One was the camouflage. This Giulia, even though the shape is far from the one that we're used to see, is still heavily camouflaged. Some weldings appear, so below this skin, which is distant from the Giulia that we know, there is already the new Giulia, but also some details, hidden ones, as the letterings of the radiator in this case, which date the car to the end of 1959. So before the presentation of Giulia, it was already there. The testing was very long and accurate, but it brought to the results that we know. Now, we've seen how the Giulia was born. Let's get to the first model, which thanks to Giuseppe Dell'Orto, we have the pleasure of having here. Yeah. Me and Lorenzo have warmed up you, and now let's enter in a magical atmosphere. After 6 years, I have again the pleasure to present you the most alpha of alphas, Alfa Romeo Giulia. So, this was the first car studied by Alfa Romeo in the wind tunnel at the Polytechnics of Turin. So, let's see the signatures of this car. You see this line, this other line on the roof, this rib, the rib on the hood, and here at the back, at the trunk. This is done by the wind in order for the car to be more stable. So if you realize, look at this mini spoiler, and the same thing is here, the famous truncated tail. So you can see also this part which goes down, just like the first part of the roof. It's a work of art on 4 wheels. The progressive deformation of the bodywork right from here, and in the first part is an accordion, and then there's a system so that in case of accident the driving wheel didn't hit the driver. So this is the outside. As for the inside, Alfa Romeo adapted material which was defined soft material. What is this soft material? It is the material that covers the hood, that today would be called cover, the 2 front mounts and central mounts. So in case of crash, the passengers would not hit something rigid, but this is for the bodywork. But the real innovation was the technique, was the engine. We are masters of engines at Alfa Romeo. So it derives from the aeronautics world. The designers came from a school of aeronautics. Just one name, Giuseppe Busso. The engine is aluminium, 2 camshafts. We've been using them from 1923. We have a distribution chain. Alfa Romeo put 2, and they are very quiet. But the innovation were sodium exhaust valves. So there were exhaust valves containing sodium at a certain temperature become liquid and cool down the temperature of the engine by 180 to 200 degrees, increasing the longevity of the engine. The brakes, okay, anachronistically drum brakes, but we had to be the best, so we put three. I don't know whether you had the luck of seeing the drum of the front wheel. It is a real work of art. I think that such a drum at the museum in New York would be admired. Giuseppe Busso was proud of it. He studied the drum with a very powerful and modulable breakage. 5 shifts, even though there was a clutch shift. Very maneuverable and 6 places. This Giulia was born in 1962, completely made in Portello. Portello had a lot of work to do, and the Giulia had there was not much space for the Giulia, so we could not add lines. So we studied to have for the first 1,000 cars from England the sheet metal. So from the front you realize that they are a little bit different. So we found this solution, but at Portello we could not build more than 7 units per day. And it was insufficient. First, because there were no cars to give to the journalists, like test cars, and that meant advertisement. And then there were no cars to send to the dealers all over Italy. So there was a huge advertising campaign, but people could not try and test these cars. But there were not cars to deliver to the customers, paying customers, be them Alfa lovers or not. They appreciated the mechanical excellence, the original line, and were able to wait for months in order to have this car. So this Giulia has a clutch shift in 1963. The Giulia adapts the Dunlop disc brakes in 64. With the presentation of the 1300 4 shifts, the 10508 is presented, which has a clutch shift. Today these cars are rare, but more Giulias like this were built than clutch. So 44,000 were built like this, and 23,000 with a clutch shift. Now it's the opposite. We see more one than the other. In 66, this Giulia is modified and adapts the grey tech. The chrome disappears behind the lights, and it was produced until 1968. After it, it was revised a little bit, and it's called 1600S for long trips, single carburetor. With this car in 1962, Alfa Romeo certified a maximum speed of more than 165 kilometers per hour. So just to explain you why more than 165 kilometers per hour, there's no producer which gives a precise speed for each model. In Alfa Romeo, we said more than 165, 170, more than 180. Why? Because a lot depended on the way the driver drove the car. These cars are very pleasant today and are very admired. So when it started to be produced, all the rest of the cars became old. So, and they did comparisons, like if it were as speed as the Giulia, if it could brake like the Giulia, So it was a comparison, like a benchmark. Okay, we can see now the next car. One of the main critiques that in 1962 were given in Monza was the sports side, so something was lacking in order for it to be a car ready to race. So in Monza, 1 year after the Giulia TI Super was presented, specialized magazines would say that it's very different, even though it's similar to the Giulia TI, and no way a TI could be transformed into TI Super. Many of these modifications are visible, but many are hidden below the skin in places that not even the owners know. Thanks to Pasquale Oliveri for this beautiful car. It's 1963. Alfa Romeo presented on the Monza track the T Super, 112 horsepower, twin carburetor. The Giulia TI Super, that many say it had aluminium hood and aluminium doors. No, no, that's bullshit. It's bullshit. So this car was lightened by 90 kilograms. So some points are visible, other points are not visible. But in a couple of years, we could have more Giulia T Super produced now than in the past. So the electron parts of the wheels. So it had a very short sport experience, but it won everywhere. On this car, which was presented in April of '63, we have a beautiful image, a beautiful picture. So in front of the Monza stands and boxes with a journalist and Guido Moroni, my friend. I had the pleasure to know him well, and when he was speaking, I was a sponge. And you see a happy man, a happy face. Only 501 cars like this were produced, and there were many optionals, but very serious optionals, not like the ones of today. So the sports customer, because this car was meant for a sports customer, had the possibility of choosing, for example, the oil radiator and a bigger tank, but when they had to choose the color, it was only white. 499 cars were white, one gray in Italy and the red one in Argentina. But in reality, there's a long series of olive greens. There's many olive greens on the Giulia TI Super. I know who has them. There's two, right? The police. So they say they've been destroyed. I spoke with the head of the police. There's only two. One was on the Tirreno, the police school, the other one on the Adriatic Sea. We were looking for them. They were destroyed. They said they don't exist anymore. The red one was white. It became red because Magenta, who's a dear friend, and lives in Argentina, as in Italy. The race color was red. He painted it red, but it was white. The rest is bullshit. And the Cozzi, I think he is a stupid customer who wanted it gray, because how can you imagine putting the clover leaf on the gray, it's on white. So this car is called Quadrifoglio, Giulia Quadrifoglio. Maybe it's like the Gronchi Rosa, no? It's, it exists, the customer wanted it like that, so okay, but it's a nonsense. Perfect. So we've explained this Giulia Super. It's very rare. And now the next one. So let's see the Giulia 1300. The Giulia was born with the 1600, contrasting the Giulietta, which was 1300. But of course, there was a part of the market which was left uncovered and is regulated by price, the purchasing price and the managing price. So Alfa Romeo, when they decide to create the Giulia 1300, they think of doing a cheap version, less expensive version of the Giulia, and tries to alleviate the cost of production and sale, both from the point of view of setups and chassis. So 1300 helps to reduce the costs of management, but it was an iconic matter. Domenico, please stay very close to the car, otherwise you're not in the camera. This is 1964, always presented in Monza, together with the Giulia TI. So as you see, as Lorenzo said, it was a cheap, not a poor car. It's two different things. So if you see this car starts to have the two only headlamps with a grille, and the same is for the back fender, and this gives the car a more sober, more elegant, clean, light line. The materials which are eliminated are these. So usually Giulia TI had a deflector. We have the trunk, in the back trunk, for example, it doesn't have the lining, so it's very little details. Looks anachronistic, but on the Giulia 1300 there were very high quality fabrics that were only for the Giulia 1300, and to me the four shifts were more robust. This is a car that only had 4 shifts. You see the lights here because it's another version, the lights at the back. So this version was constantly updated. In 68 it starts to have many details of the 1300T. So what you see here is a car that in the beginning was kind of neglected, because Alfa Romeo always presented 5 shifts. This had 4. So that's why this was called the 1300, the fastest on the market. So you thought it would be a normal one? No. It was the 1300, but the most powerful, the fastest in the sector. And why? It helped Alfa Romeo because with the Giulia T, the intrinsic value of this car was higher than the nominal one of the sales one. What does it mean? That profits were not huge. So for the first time in 64, the industry synergy was adopted. That is, when you produce more pieces which are mounted on more models, the cost of these pieces goes down and the profit increases. So thanks to the Giulia 1304 shifts in 1964, a year when there was a crisis, so Alfa Romeo with its sales sold 35% more. So in front of you there's a car which almost changed the fate of the automobile industry in Milan. And 28,000 cars were produced. The last 3 were sold in 1971. I would like to thank Ezio Caffer for this beautiful car. And let's see another milestone. Years go by, couple of years went by from the presentation, and we like would like to have something more performing from the point of view of the engine, but with the only carburetor, the Giulia TI, risks of losing drivability. Several solutions are thought, but the final one was already ready, because on the Giulia Spring GT, the 1600 engine was already launched, and that same engine would give light to the Giulia Super in 1965. This one is by Giancarlo Pietro. Yes, it's 1965. There's the Geneva Salon. Alfa Romeo presents the Giulia Super. Two carburetors, 98 horsepower. The particularity is that it has a double grille, which can be detached from the top part. It has refined details inside. Many say it wants to be the comfortable version of the Giulia T Super. No, the Giulia T Super was another planet. This is a comfortable car for long trips, and for the first time we see the details that would accompany the Giulia up to the end. We have 14 wires. You see the golden seal. It's not something useful, but on the Giulia T Super and 1304 wheels, there's no part like this. Why was it put like this? Here, for the reason that with time, the welding between the mount and this part created a micro crack. So with time, corrosions could appear. So this part was placed with this golden seal that would be also found on the driving wheel. And this would appear until the end of the production. With this car, the maximum speed is more than 175 kilometers per hour. It's a very fast car for the times. The Alfa Romeo is the only car producer that didn't give a fixed speed. So it was a very comfortable car. The inside was reviewed. The optional could be the leather seats. It was very rare for a series car. In '67, this car was modified. Giulia Super second series was born, which is a little bit more modern. So there's no longer this part, but we have 5 parts, a grille, the iconic one of the Giulia Super, and it says Giulia Super on the left of the hood, and the driving wheel is more elegant, more modern. It is the first of its type. So the second series would be produced for 1 year and 3 months, 13,000, 14,000. It's very rare to find them today. This is a Giulia Super from '66. It's very light blue, very nice and very rare, typical of the times. Okay, we can see the next car. In the meanwhile, the company grew up. Varese started to work at full throttle. It was the second plant, second biggest plant in Italy after Mirafiori. It extended over 2.5 million square meters. At the same time, it was producing the Giulia in different versions, this Giulia Spring GT, which already evolved in different versions. The company was a state company at the time, and in order to have the President of the Republic, Saragat, visit the plant of Varese, it was unthinkable to ask him to walk, and 2 Giulia Super had been transformed, but not in a simple way, but Colli, who collaborated with Alfa Romeo since the first years of the post-war period, was asked to transform these cars, creating two torpedoes by opening them that could be then closed with a vinyl roof, which were the ideal to have the president visit the plant. So there's many images of only one of these cars, like the one that you see with Salvo Sanesi that we talked about, and the president of Alfa Romeo Giuseppe Loraghi, and at the back President Saragat and Petrilli, who was the president of IRI at the time. So of these two cars, one was maintained by Alfa Romeo, and it continued not in Varese but in Balocco to have the same role, so to be used as a car to show the plant to the guests, and then it's now part of the collection of the museum. And thanks to Mauro Bramè, the Giulia 1300 Ti arrived. So it is 1966, San Felice Circeo, in the province of Rome. So Alfa Romeo presents the Giulia 144 items sold. Giulia 1300 T is a more refined version of the 4 shifts. It was strangely produced with a different brake. The 5 shifts had the same grill of the 4 shifts, and then later on in 67 it adopts this other grill with 3 elements, which would become typical of the production of the 1300 Ti. And with the production of the second series at 67, some improvements start to appear. There's no longer this kind of instrumentation, but it's very elegant. 5 shifts, more than 165 kilometers per hour. I say always more than because there's no car which is like the other in Alfa Romeo. It's living engines. So the Inter series, then it was produced with the longest armrest, and then in 69 Alfa Romeo announces the innovation Giulia 969. So we have 14 rims. It is reviewed from the point of view of the starting of the valves. It has a different functioning, very fluid. It was the car which was produced by Alfa Romeo more than the others. And family fathers liked it very much because they came from the Appia, from the 1100, so their biggest ambition was having a Giulia, because a Giulia was always seen when on the overpass lane, the surpassing lane, so it was the fastest one. So that was a very sought after car. Think that when the Giulia 1300 T was sold in 67, Alfa Romeo lowered the sales cost. Usually you increase it, but in 67 it was lowered because Giulias were also second hand, were very expensive, and the second hand, almost, if you did a proportion, were more expensive than the new one. And then we got to September 1970, the Salon of Turin. Alfa Romeo must always excel, and it presented a 1300 Super. You know what I'm talking about. It's a car with the same settings of a Giulia 1300 Ti. The front seats are narrower because for the first time there's the handbrake in the center, but the real innovation is the engine. So the engine of a GT Junior 1300 with twin carburetor was adopted today. It is very sought after. It was produced for about 1 year and 3 months, 40,000 models produced. It is very rare to find them, very rare. So it's a very performing car. We see it in the typical Holland blue color. So Alfa Romeo, in this case, marries the sportiness and elegance. You can look at the elegance of this car in this Holland blue color. We can continue. Luca Bertolli and Giulia Super. This is the last update of the Giulia Super. It is 1969. Alfa Romeo presents the Giulia Super. And this is the best of pride. When you think about the Giulia, iconic Giulia, it is this one, 4 lamps in the front. Of course, it always maintains this rib with a chromed finishing, 112 horsepower, 2 carburetors. This is defined the Giulia with low pedals because in 1970, at the end of 1970, the same cars would be presented with a higher pedal. The inside is completely reviewed. It's a little more elegant, more comfortable. And again, there's a new wheel which would be used almost till the end of the production. It is a 5-seater, a perfect brake, and very nice shift. It was difficult to go off such a nice car or thinking about changing the car unless you bought another Alfa Romeo. But when you had a Giulia, it was very, very difficult to find another car that could give you the same feelings. This car would be produced till April 72. 20,000 models produced. You started to talk about this before. The Giulia Super 1.3 is now presented. So the last edition with Paolo Stefanel, who's the president of Registro Giulia, right? But it's 1972. This is the Giulia Super 1.3, 1.6. This is a car which took part to the 60th ride we did as Registro Giulia in May. In 4 days, we did 1,500 kilometers. So our mille miglia. The cars behaved perfectly. It was presented in April 72, 1.3, 1.6. It is defined by Alfa Romeo, the Giulia unified model. But attention, unified model means, okay, when you use unified in other car producers means impoverished, but not here. Here Alfa Romeo chooses from a model the best chassis like the Giulia Super one, but gives an opportunity to the customer. So having a 1,300 engine or 1,600. So with just 90,000 liras difference, you could have the 1,600 engine. What are the difference between 1,003 and 1,006? Well, the 1.6 or 1.3 lettering, and here below the door with indication only for the model 1,600. Very modern cars from every point of view. You can drive for a long time, and when you go off the car, you would like to go on the car again and drive again. Almost 40,000 models were produced, 19,000, 20,000 were produced for the 1,600 version. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paolo. So Alfa Romeo started with Giulietta to offer a station wagon. So it was a mixed car. But for the Giulia, several names would be thought in collaboration with the Ministry of Interiors and the police, and in the end, officially for the police, the Combinata was chosen. This car is yours, Domenico. Thank you for bringing it here. This is a Giulia Promiscua. It was called promiscuous because it has, see, two seaters in the front and then a small seat at the back. It was only used on the highways. It was produced by 4 or 5 producers. First was Colli, then Grazia by Bologna, Giorgetti. This is Giorgetti in Montecatini, and I'm friends of the person who elaborated, didn't modify the cars. Okay, it was produced by Introzzi, by Lipomo in Como province, and then on the Nuova Super Chassis by Marazzi. So you could think wrong that it's just a Giulia elongated. No, it's not an elongated Giulia. Oh, I visited the producer, so Alfa Romeo gave to them a Giulia 1.3, 1.6, this color. So the first thing that I did, so the back trunk was removed and the seats. So there was no back window. What you see, this roof that starts from here and gets here, it's a completely hand-made roof, believe it or not. If you see, it's slightly imperfect. Industrially, it would be better. And the same for this back door. When you say it was cut, the back was cut. No, I've seen a wood maquette, and on the production made by the Giorgetti, Introzzi, and Marazzi, well, on the basis of the new Super, so they should have had a smooth part, but they always had these ribs. So this car has on its head 3 preheating candles because they were working on the Ronco Scrivia stretch of highway, one of the coldest. So when this car was cold, it was cold for emergencies because an accident happened or something serious. So they had to go on the highway and run, go fast. And you know that the Alfa Romeo engine, when it's cold and you have to go fast, are not always the best. So they had these preheating candles, which kept the engine heated up to 75-80 degrees, so that when you had to rush, the engine was already under temperature, on the right temperature. But people went on the car and forgot to take away these cables because it was electrically linked to the electricity through cables. So they put a little ring. So if the cables were not detached, the ring would remember to the driver they had to take them off. So this elaboration was extremely expensive. The cost was the cost of a car. 624 cars were built. Today we have maybe 50. It's very, very rare. You're comfortable. It's Giulia Alfa Romeo. The career of the Giulia is about to end, and the last version, the Nuova Super 1600, here by Stefano Borghi, would lose the name Giulia. Also the GT versions were connected to higher versions, but this new was called Nuova Super 1300, Nuova Super 1600. This is a 1600. Yes, it's May 74. We are in Fonteblanda, province of Grosseto. The new super is presented and loses the Giulia name. It's called Super. Times change, and Alfa Romeo thought of making the line of the Giulia more modern. How? They took away the rib here and at the back. But the real innovation is the front, a front with plastic grids, similar to the Alfa 2000, with 4 lamps, 135. The inside is totally revised. If we want a little bit more comfortable, modern, the central console, which is perfect for this car. And also the wheel is completely new. It's very similar to the Alfa 2000. Nuova Super 1300, Nuova Super 1600. The only difference was the lettering in the part, which said 1600, 1300. With this car, two ideas appeared. Those who said without the rib here and there, the Giulia lost its essence, and others say no, it was better to have a more modern face to the Giulia. Well, if you want my opinion, I think that both things are true. Because when you love a car, you love the pros and the cons. In this case, it is the first case in which there's only pluses, there's no cons. I like the Super, but I also like the iconic one. I don't find defects on a car, which was a car which, I repeat, made look the other cars old when it was born. What there was around. There were family cars, but since the Giulia was born, literally, there was an obsolescence of the other cars around. So there was a oil crisis, times change, and many car manufacturers present diesel versions. We wanted to present diesel versions as well. And the managers at the time decided to put in here a Perkins engine, an English engine, which was called like the factory of black smoke. 55 horsepower. We had to update. It was one of the first Italian cars to have a diesel engine. So the managers at the time decided to, and I'm surprising you now, so to position this engine here, asking who to do this to Auto Delta. So rockets came out of there, and now they had to put diesel engines there. So the managers who asked Auto Delta, and especially Carlo Chitti, to do that, he accepted the challenge and he won the challenge, of course. So if you open the hood of the Nuova Diesel, you can find a triumph of insulating material, even put here inside the hood, but it was not useful because it was very noisy. We produced 6,500 of them, and luckily most of them was demolished, so just few of them exist, and they are maintained in a corner, just saying, okay, it exists, it's there, but using it has nothing to do with what the purists of Alfa Romeo have in mind. So with the Nuova Super cycle, the production of the Giulia was concluded after 15 years. 15 years, 15 of the happiest and rosiest years of the Milanese car industry. Why? First of all, due to the number of cars produced. Many cars produced means profit, means money. And an industry, a company, has to take care of this, but then many wins on the racetracks and competitions, and I won all 5 models on the Giulia, GT Junior, so this was even more evident. So they always won. It was impossible to beat them. Now, a question for you. How can you not appreciate? How can you not desire Giulia? There's a few ingredients. Well, the Giulia is a car that corrects the mistakes of the driver as well. It puts you at ease. And when you drive a Giulia, with the other cars, well, you just drive the curves. With the Giulia, you give strokes to the curves. Why? Because when you enter a Giulia, you don't enter a normal car. It's like going in a plane. Why? I want to explain you. Try to imagine when you sit inside, you see this curved windshield embracing you, giving you the sense of safety, and all the instruments that are towards the driver, because we have to deal with the instruments. We have to get in symbiosis with the car. And then when you switch on the engine, you have a sound which is unique coming from here, only for the Giulia 105 models. Domenico, thank you so much. You are extremely competent, you are a pillar for the Giulia, you've got the passion. Well, unfortunately, time flies. We have finished our journey. Well, congratulations to the Giulia for the 60th years of Giulia, but thank you for choosing a Giulia. Thank you for being with us. Giulia had a nice career also in the police force. We have a section in the museum dedicated to the Carabinieri. I would like to thank Club Alfisti of Varese, which brought here also Giulia from the police. I thank you with this great image of the Giulia, where it was born, here in Varese. I would like to thank Domenico Pepe. There's no words to thank you. I thank Luciano Coll, Luigi Croci, who gave us also their opinions, and thank you for being part of this day.